Hi guys, welcome to the first session of this workshop series, My Psychology Club. Today we're going to cover basics of, Professor Sucharita is going to cover basics of research, busting myths about research, and mostly it's going to be interactive, so you guys can decide the flow of the session. So it's going to be mostly interactive session. So a little bit about Professor Sucharita. She is an assistant professor of psychology at Claremont with a PhD from Claremont Graduate University. Her work explores how group attachment and social identity shape behavior, focusing on language, preservation in ethnolinguistic groups, support for populist leaders, intergroup communication, and drivers of polarization and extremism. She is broadly interested in how self-uncertainty fuels support for extreme leaders and intergroup conflict. She also serves as a consulting editor for group processes and intergroup relations.
Thank you very much. It's always nice to hear about stuff you've done from someone else and be like, oh. It's always big fancy words that you have to put in, but they really are big fancy words. And then easy really if I just explained it. So, yeah, I mean, when you sort of talk about your research in that way, I mean, when you have to put it out on a formal place, you have to use, I think the key is to make it accessible. I think the first thing, which I have also been guilty of not doing. So I'll just tell you like quickly about my research. There's, as you mentioned, there are several lines to it, but it all comes down to really one thing. And the focus of my research, so first thing, I'm an experimental social psychologist, right? So this is my focus. I'm a psychologist A, right? But I don't do mental health stuff. Okay, so I'm a social psychologist. If you're first years, how many first years you have? Not to pick on you or anything, but you'll take social psych with me in your second year. Unfortunately, you cannot escape it. So you have to take it with me or Professor Garima if you're lucky, if it's her. But, so you'll take social psych. And social psychology is essentially, you'll see, very, very far removed from mental health. So psychologies in itself are quite diverse. There are different kinds of psychology. There's mental health emphasis, there's organizational behavior, there's social psychology, organizational, social psych, very close cousins. There's health-based emphasis, so social psychology obviously again is connected to health as well. Social psychology and cognitive psychology are sort of the theoretical sort of mother and father or whatever the mothers of psychology I like to think of as. I mean, they're the sort of springboard from which you learn all the theoretical principles and then you apply it to what have you, multiple different things. So mental health processes or organizational behavior or health or political psychology, which is a new thing, very, very new field. So really social psych, cognitive psych, very fundamental. So I'm a social psychologist. And social psychology then is essentially how people are influenced by social context. Right? You're an individual, we all live in a social context, and how your social context influences you. This is my research, and so my methods are very quantitative because I'm an experimental social psychologist. That means I use experiments in my methods mostly. That doesn't mean I don't use other methods. I also use correlational methods. So experiment means I put people in different conditions randomly, then I give them certain material, experimental treatment versus control group, and then I see the implications of this treatments. Could be really simple. My research is on intergroup communication, which is a very sort of new thing. We're trying to build it and develop it, which looks at sort of the cusp between social psychology and the communication sciences. So how we and within this is again extremely broad, as you can think, but to very specifically talk about, I look at, say, how leaders communicate to us, right? And how this communication shapes our identity, why we look up to leaders, why certain leaders have sway over us, why certain leaders don't have sway over us, how the media does the same thing, right? So very, very simply, because you have to pick a sort of niche thing, intergroup communication can be very broad. But to understand what intergroup communication is, it's essentially looking at online speech or hate speech or polarization, all of this born through communication. That's very broadly my research, but I apply it to understanding, say, extremism, radicalization, how people are susceptible or vulnerable to extreme behaviors. Usually violence, kind of. So this could be through religious extremism, or it could be through being vulnerable to populist ideologies. So I try to understand what motivates people to do this, experimentally and non-experimentally, both. Not just experimentally. You can't always do everything through an experiment. Interestingly, I two new research projects are qualitative. So I'm still, really learning, but my collaborators are better at it. So I've sort of relied on them. I'm not an expert at qualitative methods, but a lot of times with media stuff, you have to do qualitative research because it's rhetoric and content that's out there. But you can also do experiments with it. It's really interesting. So that very broadly is my research. So today we'll do a very, I think, interactive sort of give and take sort of thing where we'll talk about research. Okay, so Psych Club sort of wanted to do a series on really what just research entails. And so since this is the first one, we'll do a more participate. Of course, it would be really good if you guys did too pitch in. Let's start really simple with what you think research is. I think there's a lot of vagueness, uncertainty when you start out. I have been there. I'm still sort of, many times I was like, oh wait, is that research? But what really is research? When we say, we put this word out there and we say research, before we get to the myths or what have you, what do you think research is? And is it even an interesting? That's the second question. What really is research? What do you think?
I think any addition of facts, figures, or stats to your piece to make it more credible would entail research. So before you write a piece, you yourself learn about it, to incorporating it in your piece to add some kind of credibility to it.
So some evidence-based argument, and you would have to collect that evidence. So it could be really anything. It could be written material that's out there that you're reading. That would be research. Yes, yeah, I think so. What else do you think what research is? I think I've asked this question. If you asked me to define research myself, I would struggle with it.
I think it's more of like a systematic exploration of whatever you're curious about in general. That's
Systematic, evidence-based, right? So it has to be systematic. It has to be evidence-based. It can't simply be an opinion. It can't be that I sit and I think, I have an opinion about populist leaders. Everyone knows what populism is, Trump. Right? People like leaders who come about and they rile up the entire populace with elites over there. We are the common folk, fight, that kind of thing. So anywhere you mobilize people, the populace as a group. It's called populism, lots of populist leaders in the world today. I can sit around, I read the newspaper or news online, what have you, and I get some impression about populism and populist systems in the world. Is that research? That's not research. That's an opinion I've cultivated. Right? I've read many things. I'm reading. Okay, I'm reading, say, I read one article on somebody analyzed Trump's populist policies, somebody else looked at Marine Le Pen in France and how she campaigned for the elections. Well, she used all this populist rhetoric, she did this, she did that, she said this. So I have some fair idea now of what populism is, and I have several opinions and beliefs about it. That's not research. No, the systematic bit, right? There has to be a systematic investigation. Now, what I could do is I might become curious about this. I think, oh well, hold on. There are all of these leaders in the world and they all seem to be saying some very similar things. Having an opinion is not wrong. You've read things. You've read fairly expert sources on this, right? Expert being key. And you're observing something in the world around you. But now you have to systematically examine this. If you wanted to do research, some question should pop in your mind. Hey, what is this common thing that's emerging The media seems to be reporting a certain way about this, like the popular conservative media in France, a specific kind of media source in America, which seems to be aligned with Trump, which seems to be aligned with Marine Le Pen. They all seem to be doing some similar kind of rhetoric. Let me see if I can look at this rhetoric and I can find some common threads. I might develop a question. Is there something common? Is there something called populist rhetoric in a specific thing? Now, I do some kind of systematic analysis on this rhetoric. That is research. Isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think in addition to like what is included in systematic in that term would be specific and like some narrowed down, because when you go to research there is so much information out there.
Yes.
You have to have some parameters of what you're looking for specifically.
Yes.
And so right, and unbiased as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Or to the extent that is possible.
And unbiasedness, where do you think the unbiasedness will come from?
Looking at as many perspectives as possible.
Perspectives, empirical data, evidence. Some evidence, you have to come from evidence, otherwise your bias will seep in. Even if whether quantitative, qualitative, doesn't matter. Methods are later. Right? First you have a question. Now first you have to decide what systematic investigation you want to do. Right? To answer your question. You can't first of all do research without a question. Your first step one, question is needed, research question. You can't jump in and start to read 10,000 things without purpose. Right? So research question is step one. I want to answer a question. I have a quest towards something. I have to start there. Once I have a question, then I have to decide on how I will answer that question. Right? Then I start to think about all of these things. Bias. That will come with the method that I decide. If it's quantitative, can I do this quantitatively if I wanted to study rhetoric? What do you think? Qualitative is fairly simple. I could look at media rhetoric, I could look at leader rhetoric, I could do a content analysis, for example. I could look at themes that emerge in the rhetoric, and I could say, well, look, all of the rhetoric that Trump is using, or all of the rhetoric that Marine Le Pen is using, there's this one theme that emerges all the time. They seem to be pitting the elite against the common people. There seems to be a theme of victimhood. There seems to be a theme of injustice. There seems to be a theme of depravity. All of these might emerge in both of them. And there will be some unique things that emerge that are specific to France and America. And I could put them in different things. This is research, where I have systematically looked at evidence. Or I could go out there and I could create experimental manipulations out of the rhetoric that Trump and Marine Le Pen have used. And I could give it to two groups of people. I could measure your populist attitudes. And I might say that, well, if you already have a sense of populism or a populist attitude in you, you might be attracted more to this kind of rhetoric. I could do it both ways. Method is step 3-4. Without a clear idea or a question, you can't do research. You can't jump on the method first. Right? So while I think sometimes it's misleading when we introduce ourselves that I'm an experimental social psychologist, it's a method. But that's the method I choose to use. I say this because nobody should confuse me for a qualitative research because I don't know how to do it. That's the problem. Okay. Right? Kind of process of research is clear. It's an opinion piece research. Myth 1. Would you class it as research? A research piece if I wrote an opinion piece?
It's biased or anything.
It's an opinion. Even if it doesn't have bias, you wrote it with a lot of facts in it and so on. But you literally want to tell people your opinion.
I was just going to say that if it's backed by proper evidence based, if I say that this leads to this, and it's backed by proper research that has already been done, I think it becomes a research. You collated a lot of research together to form
It could be based on, there could be a grey area, absolutely.
It's also based on why you are doing the research. If you are doing the research on, say, a particular scientist, then his opinion piece would definitely count as research to study. You put in, if you
Yes, but it's opinion pieces are typically not based on systematic investigation. Even if you were a researcher and you did say sometimes people will write opinion pieces or academic blogs. Academic blogs are another big thing. People might do years of research on something, close relationships for example. I have many findings and I might choose to write an opinion piece on this, where I collate all of the things that I have written for the academic audience, that the regular audience is not reading. Who is going to pick up a journal and read my article? Nobody. I know this. 6 academics will read it, means I'll celebrate. Right. So I might say, well, it's not accessible only to the general public. Let me do a collate, like I'll collate all of my findings and I'll put them together in a more accessible piece. That's still not a research piece. It's still maybe I have to, the element of bias might seep in. I might actually take a stand on things which in research I might not.
Is it the intent with which you're writing, whatever you're writing? So with a research paper, when you have, even if there is bias that seeps in, you have to acknowledge that bias to kind of mitigate it.
Yeah.
But with an opinion piece, the entire purpose of what you're writing is to put across
Yes.
your point of view or
Yes,
your bias.
exactly. I mean, it may not even be a bias. It may still be based, bias is a very strong word. It may still be an opinion that is based on solid fact, which is good opinion pieces. But it's still not systematic, and some of them, as you said, could be systematic investigation. They could be, right, of pieces of, but it would be too heavy for you to write an opinion piece like that. So opinion pieces, purpose is only not that. Then you would just publish that in a journal, right? So the purpose of a research article and an opinion piece are fairly different, right? You're writing for different purposes. Now, yes, there are grey areas. I don't want to say that it can never be research. It depends on where you're putting it out there, right? Sometimes some opinion pieces are very heavily researched and written. We still don't call it a research piece. There's a difference.
Is the main thing that you are looking for when you say a research piece, is it the lack of or like the presence of primary research?
Yes. Some data should be there, which again you could argue that in an opinion piece you could still have data. For example, you could write a literature review and publish it in, say, psychological review. You haven't got primary data, but you're reviewing a lot of other published work and you're writing it, so you could argue that that was kind of like an opinion piece then. It's the style of writing, I suppose, where you're raising questions for further research. Opinion pieces don't do this. Opinion pieces are not concerned with raising questions for future research. They're pointing out a particular issue either in society or that the community is facing. Whereas literature reviews or reviews you would publish in a journal would be, the purpose would be to generate further research. So the purpose is different. The goal is different. I wouldn't, for example, write an opinion piece and put it in a newspaper and tell them that this is the research required in populism. This is why I'm telling them. It's not needed. But I might do that in a journal. But for an opinion piece, I might put out there that, well, listen, there are certain evils like polarization that we must guard against. Here's some research on it and why it's a dangerous thing and why it has serious implications, which I might put in a journal article also, but with the goal of generating future research. That's not the goal of an opinion piece. Opinion pieces are not geared toward generating future research. It's not the goal. Right? So the goals are different. To whether to call it research or not is not relevant. The point is, what is the goal of these two things? When you do research, your goal is essentially, what is the goal of research? Tell me. You tell me. Why should we do research? So saying all these things about research. Why should we do this? I asked this question at least once. Why should I do it? It's a lot of effort, a lot of work, cognitive energy, thinking, creativity, collaborating with people. You can never do research alone. Why do it?
I guess you're trying to add depth to a body work which already exists or may not even exist. And by do some work in our field of work, and some other theorists may say, oh, we're making this. So someone wants to, you want someone to essentially add on, review it, or just work on it further because it's an area of interest.
Absolutely, spot on.
And ideally, it's not restricted to the academic space alone, and it translates to some amount of impact on the field.
Yes, hopefully. They're very difficult to do that kind of research, but much needed, right? So it has implications. It's important for society. Also, so there are types of research. Really nicely pointed out. There's really basic fundamental research in all fields, even in psychology. Or there's very applied, which draws on basic fundamental research if it's good research and applies it to something. For example, in social psychology, there's research on terrorism, radicalization, lots of research. What makes people become radicalized extremists? Years, almost 30, 20 years of research, fundamental research first, went into understanding what predicts this. How do you even predict an individual becoming radicalized? So there's a big group in the University of Maryland in the US called START, run by Arya Kruglansky, who really, he's been doing this for like a very, very long time now. He started as like a basic social psychologist, built up a whole theoretical foundation on what predicts extremism. He's not the only one. There's plenty of other people who do this. But after years of doing this, he took this research to de-radicalize it. So if there were individuals who had joined a terrorist group, how do we de-radicalize them? So doing this in Sri Lanka, there's applications of it. The biggest one that they've done is in Sri Lanka, but they've also worked with other such. Right? There's also research on, for example, in Rwanda, Congo DRC, where people like Irvin Staub, Johanna Wallhart, who's at she's Clark, and NYU, they have a group. For years, they try to do research on what predicts, say, ethnic violence, genocide. And once it happens, but it doesn't get solved. The attitudes still remain, unfortunately. Happened, finished. Then it doesn't go back to peace, no? So to prevent further problems, you have to be very careful. For example, Rwanda had a genocide in the 90s. It's still unstable. Congo DRC is, a sort of a very precarious. You have to watch very carefully. So they went and they did research using radio dramas. They created radio dramas to create reconciliation. But years of, you can't just get into the community and start touching these things. Very dangerous to do research like that. So such kinds of research has to be built on years of what we call fundamental basic research, where somebody will sit in a lab or somebody will sit in a lab space and develop theoretical research on this, which you later use to intervene. Jumping straight into intervention is very scary to me. I get scared when people do research like this because you can harm people and you can touch things that you shouldn't, especially with such volatile contexts. So there's two types of research: fundamental, applied, right? And really fundamental, like my research is very fundamental, very theoretical, where I try to understand how communication is shaping identity. Sometimes I think, what's the point of doing it? So when you do fundamental research, you'll ask yourself every day, why am I even doing this? Who cares? But like you said, hopefully, it builds. If there's no research on intergroup communication, which is it's there, but it's all spread around. And if people are not looking at this particular thing, one of your jobs is then to say that if I at least do some research, maybe it will be out there. Somebody else will do this. So really your research then becomes a stepping stone. It's not for fame or it's not for publishing or getting fame or you should publish because that's also ethics. If you've collected data and put your participants through things and you've spent all of that money and effort and you got whatever findings you got, it's also somewhere your ethical responsibility to put it out there. And not let it rot in a file drawer somewhere, right? So I think yes, one of the fundamental goals of research is to, as Isaac Newton said, stand on the shoulders of giants. Nobody does anything without building on what somebody else did. So you could really be not a giant, but you could be like that small pebble that built the big castle. That's fine. You have to understand that you should do that work. Someone somewhere might find that useful and apply it, or you may do little pieces of research that then someone builds on. It's one of the first, most selfless aspects of research. Theory building, testing theory. If there are theories out there, we have to test them. It's very, very important. Right? We can't assume that there's a body of knowledge and it's correct. Theories have to be constantly tested in new contexts. Right? We harp about this all the time. Most of the research is in that context, it's not in this context. This is important. You have to not to say that a particular theory that was, say, developed in Iceland will have no significance in India. But we should test it. Is there anything unique in an Indian context that I can add to this? Or as is, will the theory hold up? Or are there any specific other variables I need to think of? Right? First, not to assume that it will not work in India. Why should we? It might. Right? I mean, we always talk about cultural differences, but there are also many psychological universals, as we call them. Humanity is fairly uniform in various ways. So maybe recognizing that. So that's also a unique aspect of research, is to build theory in various contexts. So theory building is one goal. Very important. Why should we build theory? Why is it even important to think of? A lot of people, when I've noticed, like young people start out, or when they write SOPs, you read SOPs and so on, they'll say theory is boring, it's irrelevant, applied is better. Why should we even think of theory? It's just a dusty body of knowledge. But a lot of academic stuff that you do in classroom is theory. But we always tend to think that theory is this dusty thing which has no meaning or application, but it's like this ivory tower. Some expert sat somewhere and said something, but it has no relevance. Is that true? It's one of the biggest myths I find with research.
I think a lot of the application is based on the theory, and also a lot of it's like when we learn theory, it's a lot like learning history so that you know what was done and learn from previous mistakes, or improve on previous theories and create better theories.
Agreed. So you think they're relevant.
Yeah.
Does anyone, and it's okay if you think that, does anyone think theories are not relevant? And there are these dusty old things that are shoved down your brain, which you wish you didn't have to learn, and you had to learn, you wish you learned more applied things. Are they even different? Tell me your thoughts, theories, and what do you think about them? If you don't like them, you don't like them.
I mean, some theories such as maybe Freudian or Jungian theories are not based on any empirical data whatsoever. I find it kind of
They were more like,
complex.
they were systems, yeah, they were theories.
There is there within reasons.
Yes, armchair psychology. Yeah,
So I
yeah.
find it kind of redundant.
Systems, but you kind of need to know the history of the field so that we don't have more armchair psychology.
Yeah, I would say though, like even with theories like
Look
that,
at Freud!
Get so much information on like that in itself. Get so much information on what not to do
Yes.
in future studies.
Yes, like
But
Bill
like
Grove.
you know it. We know it now.
Yes.
Thanks to him, right?
You'll be surprised.
But why are we studying it in so much detail? Like, why can't it just be a cautionary tale?
Well, because I mean, we can dismiss Freud, but he did tell us a lot about us. There was something inside. To dismiss a lot of things he did. We shouldn't do those things, but I think it's important to know.
I think it's also important to understand that we can, at this point, critically deconstruct what was there at one certain point in order to build on that. So only if something is systematically gone can we build a new foundation from there.
And so you need to know old theories. And you need to know theories for this reason, because otherwise, what will happen? You'll just be groping in the dark, no? Somebody in Scandinavia will study something, and then I will try to study the same thing here, and we're both trying to understand, oh wait, when you're a member of a group, it seems that your self is tied to the group. Ah, I'm attached to the group, I have social identity. Somebody in Sweden studies this, and then I study this in India, but we've not both developed a theory.
Slows down progress.
It slows down progress, and we're all sort of looking for the light switch in different parts of the world without really saying that, there's a body of knowledge. It's called a certain theory. And you know what? It might apply in different contexts, and if you use this body of knowledge, it really gives you like a hand up in terms of a systematic tool to understand the specific human behavior in our case. Theories are useful, otherwise we would just keep reinventing the wheel every single time. Now, the boundary conditions of theories you will have to check every single time. So there's a very nice piece that a social psychologist called Steve Reicher wrote some years ago, where he said, you can't simply take a theory and stick it everywhere. So if for example, if I'm studying the Israel-Palestinian conflict, there are theories that have been developed on it. I can't simply pop it up and go to Ukraine and stick it there. That would be idiotic, absolutely. So I would have to very carefully, systematically think of what applies, what doesn't apply, what are unique. There are, I think, certain mechanisms or processes that are common to intergroup conflict of a certain nature. I can develop a body of knowledge about it, and I can test it in different contexts. This now gives us some solid understanding from which to develop applied applications. Otherwise, you would just be like, okay, I have to solve a problem, but I don't know anything about it. A theory gives us that foundation, a common base, right? So they are really linked. A lot of times, one of the biggest myths is that applied means no theory. Which gives me a kind of like panic if you're doing that kind of research, and you'd be surprised how many times people will say this in interviews, they'll say this in, almost like theory is this jaded thing that you keep trying to teach us, but it's nonsense, and it's only preventing me from doing fun applied things that require direct attention.